Hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of the Always Be Testing podcast. I'm your host, Ty DeGrange, and I'm thrilled to have Scott Jablonski today. What's up, Scott?
Thanks, Ty, man. Good to see you again. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely, absolutely. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
Scott is a analytics growth strategist, business growth. He's seen a lot of awesome things in this world of sports and data, in business, and now certainly in investing and in startups. Going to be just stoked to dive into all things with Scott today.
Thanks for having me
What's
on. So
been
I'm
going?
excited, man. It's good to reconnect.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, man. What are some of the learnings that you experienced with your time at the NBA? I'm dying to hear a little bit about that learning for you.
Yeah, it's crazy. So just for background, I had been working for several years. Went to business school. When I graduated business school, I went to the NBA. And obviously, a lot of people know what the NBA is about. They have their favorite team, their favorite players, but it was a real sense of drinking from a fire hose because if I say, "Hey, I'm a fan of the Dallas Mavericks. Hey, I know this player and that player. That's great." But when it's your job, when you're going in and working with personnel teams, getting to meet players, getting to meet the league executives, it's a whole different ballgame. No pun intended. So I think the real learning for anybody who has worked in sports is you get to see how the sausage is made. You get to see what goes into building the business. And when you think about a team or a league and all the games it has to run, and you think about the in-game stuff that has to happen, the legal stuff that happens behind the scenes, the financial stuff that happens behind the scenes, that was really the cool part of working at the NBA and later the NHL. You get to really see what's going into making this game what it is, and it's really complex. There's a lot of complex issues, but it was a terrific learning experience.
That's awesome. And just kind of speaking about sports in general, and is there truth in that? Like, it seems like sports has kind of like some perceptions around like, maybe they don't have to pay everyone as much, and there's like a huge line of people wanting to get in because it's the hot thing. Like, can you share a little bit about like some of maybe those misnomers and benefits of being in the sports world and for folks on the outside?
Yeah, I think the first part is what you already highlighted, Ty, is that everybody has an interest in sport. Well, a lot of people have an interest in sports, right? And I always said you never found a person working in sports who says, "I'm in sports because I couldn't get into this other industry. I tried to get into insurance, but I couldn't get a job. I have to work in sports." You never meet that. You meet people who are just loving the game, loving that environment. So what does that mean? You kind of highlighted it. There's a line of resumes at the door, right? So everybody wants to be involved with it. But I think it actually requires a unique perspective, a unique set of skills to really succeed in sport. Because what you have to do is take away your fandom and think about how the business runs, what actually makes that engine go. So that was, I think, a real learning experience for me, was trying to adjust from being a fan into being like a professional in the space. And let me say that you can be both. I knew a lot of huge fans who were absolutely terrific coworkers and terrific leaders in the industry. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, there are some aspects of, like, especially for a person coming out of, let's say, undergraduate university, right? Like, okay, you want a job in sports, you're not going to be making six figures right off the bat, right? You got to kind of work your way up. So you do see in sports that people kind of get a space that they play in, and then they develop their core skill set and move from there. And I think that's really important for anybody who might be interested in getting in the space. But all to say, like, you can be a fan and be super sharp and super terrific. And I was very fortunate to work with a lot of people like that at the NBA, the NHL, and some other places as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome. The NBA seems to be kind of leading the way in certain aspects of like the sports world of like operations and business and marketing, and that's my outsider's perspective. And sometimes you hear whispers here and there of like how leagues are run and what's working and what's not. But do you have any observation on maybe the things that the NBA seem to do well vis-a-vis the other leagues? I know this isn't necessarily an analysis of that in particular, the whole show, but I'd love to get your view on that. Is there anything that you found was interesting about what they did maybe differently, or what you think they seem to be doing well now?
Well, yeah, it's tied into something about marketing. I think the NBA is the best marketing league out there. because the NFL as a league, National Football League, is a very easily consumable sport. You have 17 games in the fall, mostly on Sundays. And then they play in the playoffs in January. And the first February weekend, you have the Super Bowl. So you can set your watch to it. The NBA, the teams play 82 games a year. And then, NHL has a similar schedule. Baseball has a bigger schedule than that. So the NBA is caught in this middle ground where it's consumable, but not as consumable as the NFL. So I think what we've seen a lot with sports in the last few years is a lot of the personalization of sports. So when you look at Drive to Survive, the Formula One series on Netflix, they really personalize the drivers. Charles Leclerc versus Lewis Hamilton, right? And the NBA has always been very good with that, starting with Bird and Magic and Dr. J in the early 80s, and then Jordan. And you can go walk right through all of those athletes and those teams. They've always done a really good job of marketing their players and their stars. Um, and even though we had incidents like the Malice, the Palace, and other things that, the 08 crisis, financial crisis, when I was working at the league, there's a lot of stuff going on then. The NBA has been very good about working its way through there and still developing this broad base of talent to play these games, and fans love the games and the players. So I think that's been the strength of the NBA, day in, day out. They've always been very, very good at that. And honestly, for me, that was a learning experience because I had not worked around marketers like that before. So to see them in that element succeeding, it was really, really cool. So I think that's where the NBA has always been very good. And I do think the NBA too, just basketball in general. I had a chance to travel a bunch and meet a lot of people from other places. Basketball is a very approachable sport. Like, you need a basketball, you need a hoop, maybe two hoops. That's it. And it's like soccer, right? Or international football. You only need a ball. So because it's so easily consumable, you have a lot of passionate fans in Europe and Asia and other places. I remember the Olympics in Beijing, and Kobe at the time was on the U.S. team. It was like the Beatles coming to China. So, like, in that sense, the NBA has a very good product and they're very good at marketing it. So that's definitely one of the takeaways I had in my experience there.
That's so cool. I think that speculation here, but I've always thought that basketball is a special sport because in the live experience is very unique. You're kind of it's almost more intimate. You're closer. There's less players. You're kind of feels like you're almost up close and personal with some of them. Obviously, TV and video and tech has enabled a lot of that. Football, it's a little bit more. You've got helmets, and maybe it's a little bit farther away. And yeah, the tech has been able to zoom in, but I feel like basketball can maybe benefit from that a little bit, and that's helped them at its core. It's kind of interesting.
Well, it's interesting too, Ty, because like working at the leagues, especially as a league employee, you technically work for the league, but you really work for the teams. So at the NBA, we had 60 teams at the time because we had the 30 NBA teams, we had the WNBA teams, and then we had the G League teams, the minor league teams. So 60 teams there, you're working with 60 businesses plus the league 61 on a daily basis. And same at
Wow.
the NHL, where I went after that, we had 30 teams at the time. So that was also a terrific learning experience because you get to see how a lot of teams are trying to chase the same goals: a championship, selling tickets, big sponsorships, signing a big player, and they're taking radically different ways to get to that solution. So yeah, it's another thing about learning, to work with a league and a team. You get to work with a portfolio of companies, which is probably hopefully informed me later in my career with other work I've done. But yeah, that's a very good learning experience as well.
Yeah, probably a good segue into some of the portfolio companies that you're counseling and advising at some point in our conversation today. Back on the learnings kick, which is a favorite theme of the pod. Similar to the NBA. Tell us a little bit about NHL. What were some of the learnings there?
Yes, the National Hockey League. It's similar to the NBA. A lot of the employees have gone between the two leagues, like myself, but it's a
Hmm.
much different sport. It's harder to play. You need a sheet of ice. You need a lot of pads. You need ice time. So any parents out there who have had kids play hockey, the struggles of getting ice time and pads and all that stuff. But what I'd say is there's a much deeper appreciation for hockey. It's sort of like a more narrower funnel and a deeper funnel compared to the NBA, because a lot of people watch the NBA and just consume it just as general fans, but the NHL has hardcore, diehard fans. And it's primarily, the NHL obviously is in North America, but with 7 teams in Canada, and then there's interest obviously in Europe as well. It's sort of a different fan base than the NBA. But for me, I got to take a lot of those basic learnings in the NBA and seeing how they did some things so well, and then now apply this to a different sport. So then it was for us at the league building out a consultative arm that could work with the teams on their business and analytics. So it was saying, hey, how do you sell tickets? How do you price tickets? How do you think about selling sponsorships and doing other things around the business? But also for me personally, it was terrific to work with the owners. So, working for a league, you work for the owners, and going through collective bargaining, which is this process where the owners and the players get together and arrange a labor agreement to then work and play seasons and everything else. Um, I got to sit next to very, very bright people in the legal space, in the business space, and work with these owners who have largesse and all tons of exciting, successful experiences, and see how they do things. And that's inspirational at some level because you find very successful individuals who have done things really, really well, but at the same time might not know everything about running a sports team because a lot of these owners don't make their fortunes running sports teams. they make their fortunes in other industries and then they take it to sports. But yeah, working at the NHL, working with the owners, working on the Vegas Golden Knights joining the league and the collective bargaining and building arenas and repricing arenas, like all those things, definitely was kind of the next step in my career after the NBA, which was a good compliment to the prior experience.
That's awesome. And maybe, just based on what you just said there, are there people or teams or processes that jump out at you that really wowed you to like maybe an example of someone who came from, hey, built wealth, did well in business, transitioned into sports ownership or management and did a really good job of making that transition and doing it the right way and doing and running a really smart, well-run business, but knowing that it's sports and it's different. Is there any maybe examples or people that kind of you've maybe looked to over the years or just heart thinking back of were there any things that kind of jumped out at you from that experience where you're just like, wow, I was really impressed by that.
Yeah, I'd say a couple owners come to mind. One is Ted Leonsis, who owns the Washington Capitals, and then the sports group Monumental in Washington. Just a scrapper. He was just always doing something, right? Always working on this or that. And I got to work with him a little bit on the collective bargaining process. So really sharp guy who's built heck of a kind of empire there in the DC area. And then another person I'd throw out there is Jeff Vinnick. So Jeff Vinnick ended up buying the Tampa Bay Lightning, and I think one of the difficulties that the NHL had for a lot of years was bringing hockey to warm areas like Texas, like California, like Florida. And Jeff, very bright guy, very successful guy, bought the Tampa Bay Lightning and ended up winning the Stanley Cup with that team. And not just winning on ice, but they were developing a lot of things around their business, developing real estate area around Tampa Bay. And it goes to show you how, a smart individual and his team that were really accomplished people as well kind of broke the mold. And in that sense, it's cool to see, right? You can kind of challenge those assumptions and test those assumptions and maybe break them and then say, hey, how do we think about this? So both working with Ted and Jeff, they were terrific individuals, really, really accomplished individuals. And it was great to see them take businesses in new ways. And that's what good leaders do.
I love that. Great comments, great suggestions. Going back a little bit to the educational experience you had, Harvard Business, what were some of the aha moments that you gathered from that experience?
Yeah, so I was fortunate to go to Harvard Business School. I think the biggest aha moment I had was how different we all were. I think if people were to look outside and say, hey, here's a class at Harvard Business School or Stanford GSB or Wharton or Booth or any of these locations, you'd say, oh, they're a dime a dozen. Everybody's kind of the same. But honestly, like for me, I'm the first person in my family to go to college. So I was unique in that sense. Or being from upstate New York, I was unique in that sense. Or coming from technology, I was surprisingly unique in that sense, at least when I graduated in 2007. So when you get to meet other people and you're literally meeting people who are bringing water to faraway villages, it really challenges your assumptions. And in that sense, I think we can't judge everybody with paint everybody with one paintbrush, right? Or judge the book by its cover per se. But I think that was the coolest part for me was seeing how I felt unique given my personal background, but seeing how we were all unique in our own ways. And that, I think, it actually is the engine for the business school process, because you put individuals in a room and you give them a case, or you give them a situation. You say, what would you do? And if you have 90 people in a room all looking at each other in their exact duplicates of each other, copies of each other, it's not a very dynamic conversation. But to say, hey, I am from this rural area, or hey, I do have experience in this space that no one else in this room has, that's where you get to hear the other perspectives. And I think, broadening that out to management, the important thing here is we have to have personalization with management. We have to treat people in different ways. We can't just have you put your dictum out there and then everyone subscribes to that. So it's a balance, right? You can't customize everything every day for everybody. But when you get to see how people think about things in different ways, you do need those different voices in the room. And I really believe a lot of these business school programs, their success is based upon having the differences in the room. Because I think more broadly, businesses need differences in that room. And that's something I experienced for a couple of years at business school. So that was terrific for me.
I love that. I love that. Um, you you have such awesome experiences around data analytics, advising massive companies, making assessments for pro sports teams that are major to their future and present, right? Um, what are some things that maybe people get wrong about like the functions of what you do and kind of the nuts and bolts of how you operate and help businesses make better decisions?
Yeah, I think, I love the title of the podcast, Always Be Testing. And I'm a data guy, and you're a data guy too. So I think sometimes when people say, oh, you're a data person, you must be really like very hard edge, like it's yes or no, or that kind of stuff. No, I mean, there's always some rounding of the edges that have to occur. And so if you were to look on the face of it, anyone like you or like me, and say, well, you're always testing and you're always doing your little data analysis thing, um, that's an input in the process. It's never the full basis of the decision. So any good business decision needs a little bit of quantitative and a little bit of qualitative. And I think that's where some businesses, and I've seen this in sports too, where it's like, oh, well, the war of this baseball player is this, so we sign him or we don't sign him. No, there's a little bit of balance in all of those things, and I think it's important to recognize that people who are in the quantitative side of things, the analytical side of things, they need to have that balance. But they might have better analytical skills per se, which is great. But they also need to build the qualitative skills, and that's something that I realized in my career, and I had to work on, and I continue to work on to this day. Because hopefully, if you get that balance, then you can challenge yourself and say, hey, the numbers are saying this, but we got to think about this cultural context piece of it, right? Or some other contextual piece of it. That's where maybe people get that wrong about me. I'm not sure, but that's, I know, somewhere where I had to develop myself in my career.
No, I love that. I love the transparency and sharing that part of the journey for you. That's awesome. Um, you've been exposed to a lot of the investor community, the startup community, especially recently after some amazing experiences. What are what are some of the things you've observed? I mean, we see how things have changed a lot, but what are your observations in the venture and startup community, maybe in the last couple of years?
Yeah, you bring up a good point. The last couple of years, the last 18 to 24 months have been crazy for venture capital. So if you look at investment in venture capital, at least in the US, it was basically skyrocketing up through 21 or 22. And then the wheels kind of came off. Why is that? Because interest rates rose. So we had a hot economy. So the Fed would raise interest rates to kind of slow and tamp down the economy. Well, what happens is venture capital looks for unicorn returns. It makes a bunch of bets, and ultimately, a venture capital fund that's going to return investment after 10 years. A venture capital fund has to beat what an investor could get in other ways over those 10 years in terms of returns. So when you're looking at 7 to 10% returns per annum, compounded year over year over year, VC needs some big winners. And so what happens is VC goes out and says, let's find these big winners. And you find businesses who say, look, the interest rates are low at this moment. We'll go out there and we can use these assessments and these, assumptions, I should say, and then say, look, we can achieve X revenue in Y years or Z profit in Y years. And that has changed because interest rates climbed so much in the last 24 months. So that has been a shock to the venture capital system. And there's a really complex web of things there because you have investors called LPs who are in the venture fund and then all these other parts. And so venture is a continual process. It's not just like you make a bet and that's it. They're making bets. It's like having wine. There's vintages of venture capital investments, right? And so when 21, 22, the peak kind of then went downward, you had a lot of businesses with lofty valuations who at that point couldn't do it anymore because the whole game had changed financially. So you saw a lot of later stage investments. So series maybe B, but C, D, E, and you saw those valuations plummet. And that has a material effect on venture capital. So then that was a shock to the venture capital system, which was still trying to make investments to the newer vintages coming in. So all of this has changed a lot in the last 18 to 24 months. Um, what I hear from friends and colleagues in the space is that we're getting to a point of stasis. We're kind of stabilizing a little bit, but really it's a question of exits. So can you find the companies who were invested in who will still IPO? We saw Instacart IPO in late 23 at a fraction of their former valuation. So that wasn't great. And it feels like everybody's waiting for the other person to jump in the pool first in terms of an IPO. So that's just some like macroeconomic things that are going on with venture capital. But that being said, I think on the founder side, you're seeing some tech firms do layoffs. There are a couple 100,000 tech layoffs in the US last year. We saw, I think, another 30,000 in January here in the US. So you're finding a lot of really good talent who's sitting there not working for a big tech firm anymore and saying, I have an idea. And we're back to the days of two people in a garage. And especially with the advent of artificial intelligence and how that can really scale businesses much more quickly now, you're seeing tons of founders out there doing all kinds of things. And in one sense, it's a little bit maddening because there's so much innovation going on. But in the other sense, it's like freeing. It's amazing. You're seeing people take chances again. And that is really exciting to see. So I think we're at this very interesting point of investment where hopefully the institutional investor environment is stabilizing a little bit and more angel investors are coming in to the fray. But at the same time, you're finding these younger companies, this new talent coming in with new ideas. And these two things are kind of converging. And there's a sense that there's an excitement. Like there's some really cool stuff around the corner. We're already seeing really great companies and startup companies in the space, but we're on the verge of something great. So that's exciting to me. And that's what I've seen in the last 2 years. So
I
it's
love
been
it.
a little bit of the bad, a little bit of the good. Hopefully, hopefully we're approaching more good now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we've all seen some really amazing companies come out of, lean or challenged times. And I think there could be maybe some truth to that where, you know, some return to normalcy, but also some headwinds for certain sectors and individuals. But I think you're right to be. I like the optimism, and I think you're very balanced and you're very reasonable in your pessimism and optimism. And I think that there's a lot to be optimistic about from what you're seeing in the community. So that's positive. Are there
Yeah, and
startups
and
that you're kind
honestly,
of jazzed about that you want to share?
yeah, I mean, there are startups out there, but sorry, I was gonna go back for a moment and say the other thing too is the
Sure.
corollary between working in sports and working with these founders is that there is this sense of optimism, and so when you work in sport or any field with a lot of passion in it, it could be music, could be food, it could be a whole bunch of things, fashion. You're working with people who are inherently motivated to come to work every day. And it's not just like, I'm here to collect the paycheck. No, they're like, they love that industry. And that's the same thing I'm seeing on a day to day basis with the founders I get to interact with because they are people who have some core knowledge in a certain area and they are very excited about telling you about it. And they're very excited to tell potential investors about it because they see they can follow this passion into something that's becomes more than a passion, it becomes a profession and it can become an ongoing concern, a large business potentially. That's what's refreshing to me, and honestly, like the drip of energy in my veins every day. Because when you get to work with inspired people, it's contagious. It inspires you, and hopefully, everybody gets a chance to do that in their respective careers. But it's really important to take note of that because without that inspiration, without that optimism, life becomes a lot more dull. So, I guess
Yeah.
2 cents of free advice here,
Yeah.
like I think it's going out there and finding those passions, whatever it is, and chasing those passions and working around other people who have those passions because that is just this addictive thing that gets you going every day and gets you really interested in finding out more about the industry, that company, that founder. And
Yeah,
I'm blessed to experience that every day.
I love that, man. That's huge and definitely feel very similar. You did mention wine, so I'm compelled to ask you about your wine, um, how you view wine, how you track it, how you think about it. Can you share a little bit more about that?
I never thought this would come up. Yeah, so wine is this interesting thing because it's subjective and objective. The wine industry has gone through periods of boom and bust. But here, I live in the Bay Area, and we're not too far away from wine country here. You're very familiar with that too, Ty. And yeah, it's like, look, good bottle of wine. It's like sitting around the campfire and trading stories. It's a good social lubricant, as they say. And so for us, we of course enjoy a glass of wine now and again, but also there is a sort of business around this. And what you're finding is at the end of the day, you have small mom and pop vineyards, wineries that have product and they have to price that product. And how do you price something that you think tastes well, but I think is a little too tannic, right? Or something like that. So I had created a wine model a while ago about pricing and stuff. So it gives you an idea of me, always be testing. And having the chance to kind of look at wine and say, hey, I like this kind of wine. What is this priced at? And I can kind of use that as a buying guide. Because there's a lot of wine out there. But look, I think with anything, it's experimentation and figuring out what you like and don't like. And inevitably,
I
I
think
think there's some wines I might like that you might not like, and vice versa. So it's the combination of subjective and objective that again gives you a view into my life when I'm sitting there trying to figure out, is this bottle of wine priced correctly? Yes, I think it is. I'm going to buy it. Right? Like,
I love that. It's just such a great reflection of your, data driven nature and it's also I think you're kind of selling it short because I also view it as you basically are able to with data and in your models kind of say okay it, this wine is probably worth a heck of a lot more than it's being priced at and conversely this wine's probably really overpriced so I think it's just such a cool confluence of like getting value getting into something that you enjoy. It's almost like an asset for some people, so it's almost like a stock. It's just fun stuff, and I think it's commendable that you took it that far.
totally. Look, we could be talking about art. We could be talking about baseball cards. Like these are all collectibles, but we can't drink a baseball card. That's the difference. So the enjoyment of something that makes it a little bit different. But yeah, that's the fun part of it, right?
I love it. I love it. I think you kind of touched on this earlier around like leading teams and what are some of the things that good leaders can get wrong about leading teams. You talked a little bit about personalization, themes of empathy and value of diversity, but what would is there any other things that you would share around, leading teams that you think, sometimes good people miss?
Yeah, let me go back to diversity for a moment. Diversity can be kind of the back of the baseball card. You can say, hey, this person is this race or this gender or from this area. But I think there's also intellectual diversity. And what I mean is the teams that I've seen work well usually have somebody on there who's a little bit of the black sheep, or a little bit of the thumb to the forefinger or the other fingers, right? And what teams need is somebody to challenge them. And I've seen very successful individuals and teams, especially in large organizations, this happens, where groupthink becomes a disease. It says, hey, the leader said we should do A. And everybody else is like, yeah, we should do A. A makes a lot of sense. Let's do A. Let's do A. And sometimes that's right. And sometimes you have a visionary leader who just can't get anything wrong and just nails it every time. And everybody does A and everybody's okay. But man, there are other times when you should have done B or C. And I think that is something that is just inherent in business that will be there forever and forever unaddressed. That sometimes there are other voices in the room who do raise a hand and say, hey, I know we should all be thinking about A, but have we thought about the impact on B or C or D? And that's just one of those short sighted moments that only experience can kind of address over time. And I've done it too. I've sat there and said, yeah, let's do it. This make sense. And then only afterwards, I was like, well, actually, if I were a little bit more intellectually honest with myself and maybe a little more experienced or had more context or nuance, I would have seen this coming and I was wrong. Right. And so any team, especially one that's being formed, where you're saying, hey, let's start a company together, or hey, we've got a company with a couple of people, we got to hire a few more. Don't be afraid to have somebody who's disagreeable on that team, because that person can be seen as, oh, it's just Ty saying his Ty stuff again. That's unfair. I think what is fair is to appreciate that somebody wants to challenge that status quo, because status quo is the normal baseline for everything. Everybody wants to settle into something. You got to shake it up every once in a while. So to have that disagreeable person, oftentimes that person's analytical too, right? Because they're seeing a different view of the business. To have that balance, that diversity of intellectual approach, I think is super, super important. And even the most successful leaders, way more successful than I am, deal with this and suffer from it. So it's just something I see a lot, especially more with the younger companies, because they're going through a much more dynamic, burgeoning situation than more established companies might.
Love that. So great to have the contrarian view and devil's advocate and uh, push for alternative ways of thinking about things. I think that's a stellar point. Um, is there a book or a resource that you've had recently that really is inspired or changed a view for you that you want to share?
Yeah, it's a book I read several years ago. It's The Paradox of Choice by Barry Schwartz. And the basic gist of the book is that you have sort of this abundance of options, right? And especially in the United States, right? I remember taking an Italian friend years ago to a supermarket, and we were in the chip aisle. He's like, I can't believe it. You have like 60 kinds of potato chips. We have two kinds in Italy. And having that abundance of choice, which we see as a great thing here, especially in the United States, actually requires a lot more effort to come to a decision. It can leave us with angst, right? You're like, what kind of chips do I choose? I don't know. There's barbecue. There's this one, right? Um, and I think that really opened my eyes to a couple of things. One, trying to be more focused in what I do and what I'm, looking to enjoy or choose or whatever. But secondly, I think more importantly, maybe for you too, Ty, is like in a services industry, for a long time, I thought the correct service to provide was optionality to my client, to say, they're saying, hey, I've got options A, B, and C. What should we do? And I'm like, look, we can make A work. We can make B work. We can make C work. We can make it all work, right? We're here to make it work. But that leaves them with angst because they've asked you what you think they should do, and you have not told them. In fact, you've probably made it more complex. So the Paradox of Choice was this eye-opening book for me because I got to understand that some of the things that I was doing, especially on the services side, wasn't being helpful to clients. So it is better for me to go out there and say, you got to choose option B, because here's what I think because of my experience and what the data is saying and how I'm reading the situation. I might be wrong, but I'm going to remove that paradox of choice and give you an informed opinion. At the end of the day, it's up to you, Ty, if you're my client, to work with it or not. You say, I agree with it, let's go, or let's not do it. But I think that's what's important, especially in this services space. And services you can be your own consulting firm or marketing agency. But also, if you work in a company, you're providing a service to that company. Be more focused in what you're doing and have an opinion on that. And the opinion might differ, and that's totally fine. But make sure you're removing that paradox piece, the angst around that, because you're coming out and saying, my experience and the data, the whatever, is suggesting we do this. That's, I think, a book that really shifted my mindset. That I read that several years ago, but it's stuck with me since.
I love that decision fatigue and simplicity and clarity and hey, knowing you're the paid expert in the situation or a contributor, you can have a real impact. And I think cutting through some of that noise is super valuable. So I definitely love that. Great suggestion. Um, as a data junkie, as a data expert, you've helped data teams, you've helped analytics and insights teams. What are some maybe errors or fallacies or things that come up with data and data teams? And how do you kind of coach people to avoid those and improve upon data and data analysis?
Yeah, you highlighted exactly where I was going to go with it. Data analysis. When people hear that, they think, oh, I got to take some stuff and analyze it. But we have to separate that into two pieces. We have to separate into the data and the analysis. The analysis are skill sets, right? It's like, hey, I know Excel. Hey, I know regression and all these multivariate regression, other things. Fine, those are teachable things. The data, though, has to be right. that's that's where I see a lot of analysis fail. And what we're seeing that in spades right now is in AI, because artificial intelligence is based on data. And it's saying, hey, here's what we can draw, and machine learning as well. It's based on data. So how do we think about the data set? And is that a good representative sample of what true means, right? That's a very good question. And it's something I think a lot of companies are struggling with right now. Because let's say we use an LLM based on social media data. We're going to look at everything that was posted on Twitter X. I can tell you a lot of stuff on Twitter X is false, and a lot of it's true, but there is some falsehoods in that data set. So anybody who's thinking about data, whether it's marketing data or any other kind of data, needs to have recent, informative, verified data. That's the important part. And so no matter what analytical skills you might have, if you have a bad data set, it's not going to help. And I've seen that happen. I've suffered through this as well. And so it's one of those things I think we kind of look past, because we say analysis. So, well, can you do in Excel? Can you make these numbers sing and all this stuff? Yeah. There's a famous line. There's lies, damn lies, and statistics. You can make the data say what you want, but if you really want to get to the core nexus of like what a decision has to be made about, that data has to be correct. And we're seeing that again in spades right now with artificial intelligence, because we need verified data. And there's actually a whole cottage industry around that now. How do we get unstructured data out of a PDF with a table, right? We can't right now. Well, it's a little clunky. So how do we extract that? How do we get really good experts in the field to share their thoughts, their insights? Because that's core data. That's value right now. Much like railroads were value 100 years ago to transport goods between points A and B, now it's data and the accuracy of that data and the timeliness of that data. So that's the thing I've seen teams disregard sometimes. We're like, look, we got a really talented individual. He or she can kind of make this data sing. That's not enough.
Yeah, well said. It makes me have a spark of a moment of imagining when, ChatGPT gets smarter, which can be exciting and scary for some people. But imagine, now you're getting, Bing, Bard, Google, obviously, you're getting, you can prompt so many things, but imagine being able to say, like, I need the best sports analytics, pro in the Bay Area, and then like, you pop up, and it's like I think there's ways where we could get even more, not to toot your horn too much, but like, hey, I need somebody in this region, or hey, I want to. It could get kind of nuts in a way when it comes to like being able to pinpoint specific experts for things, not just. I think it could become there could be some connectedness there coming in the future where it feels very robotic now. It's a whole nother episode, but I'll stop there. Um, this has been awesome, by the way, and I think there's just a ton of learnings, and it's just jam packed for this episode. What is Scott most excited about in 2024, and maybe beyond?
Oh, wow. That's a very existential question. Look, you're a parent. I'm a parent of small kids, and it the future looks a lot different as a parent, right? If you have your own person, you have a relationship with somebody, you can kind of do what you want. That's one thing. But when you have little youngsters and you think about what their lives are like in 15, 20, 25 years, it gets a little scarier. I think optimism comes from is getting to work with so many very bright founders who are deciding to take their careers into a different path to address these problems. I think when you look at a very expensive industry like climate change, where you're thinking about how do we bring other forms of power to people, how do we think about more reusable batteries, how do we think about all this stuff, that's a big set of problems to tackle. Big set of problems as we're seeing weather patterns change around the world now and other things happen in more extreme weather. So something like climate change, as an example, or other big things like cancer and other, these huge existential crises, we're seeing the best and brightest say, I want to take my career and do something about that. That inspires me. That makes me feel good.
Like,
And
yeah,
for that matter, I get to work with some of those individuals, and if I can bring some experience to them and help them in those fights, great. That I'm happy to do that, because even if it's pro bono, like just the chance to work with somebody who's devoting his or her time to that stuff, that's what makes me feel good about 24.
hell
But
yeah,
too, I think, although it's scary for some people, I think what AI is doing, it's a long, discussed topic now for the last at least the last 18 months. But
Yep.
since ChatGPT launched publicly, what AI is bringing to us, it's crazy. And look, it is scary in some senses, like what it can do. But man, it's revolutionizing everything. And it will be really fun to see this burgeoning area of technology in the world develop. I mean, this is like 25 years ago with the dot-com era. We're here. And I can tell you here in the Bay Area, the excitement is back. Like there are these meetups, and you look around the streets, and everybody's there looking for venture capital money and everything else. So um, to be kind of at this nexus point where things are crossing over, it's really exciting to see this in 2024 and to see what that could bring to industries and the revolutionizing of them. That's really cool. I think we're at a major moment of our lives.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're encouraging our teams to explore it and play with it. I know our clients are. I think it's I love what you said about, supporting founders that are really making a great dent and a positive change in the world with a lot of the challenges and opportunities that are in front of us. And I loved Y Combinator's verticals that they kind of shared of like, key areas that need help. Cancer, you mentioned, is on that list, and I think there's so many good ones. And so I'm of the same mindset, like, hey, let's help where we can. And our view, performance marketers, we can certainly do that for some of these companies, and you can certainly do that from a business strategy and advising and data and investing perspective. So I think it's kind of exciting. Um, I think you kind of nailed today. Wrapping up here, some fun thoughts and questions. What's a purchase recently that you just can't live without that you're loving? Maybe $100 or less. Anything that's a must have that you recommend?
It's not a recent purchase, but when I travel and when I sleep, I need the eye mask, man. I'm going to admit it on a podcast. Got to have that eye mask. And uh, our minds are always going. There's a lot of stuff going on, especially working and being a parent and everything else. But when I get that eye mask on, I just feel that comfort. I'm like, okay, I'm on this long flight. I can sleep now. So for me,
Dang,
under the
I
hundred
love it.
dollar category, dude, every time, that's one of those things I use religiously. So I highly recommend it to anybody, especially who doesn't have blinds on the windows. That's how I started in the first place. I had no blinds; it was really bright. I tried it, and I was like, this is great. So that I will shamefully admit that I got to have my eye mask.
I love that. I'm gonna have to look into that. I think my wife Blaine stole mine, so I need to go out and buy another one.
Yep, there you go.
I love it. Anything else interesting? You've got some awesome stuff going on. Is there anything that you want to share to the audience that maybe they don't know about you? That you want to share?
They now know I wear an eye mask, so we can cross that off the list.
It's more than enough.
Um, yeah, exactly. No, I mean, look, for me, I'm again blessed to work with a lot of really intelligent founders, and I'm always looking to learn too. That's the other part of this too. Like, I think there's a hunger to learn. I know there's a hunger to learn for me, and to work with founders, not just in the sports space. That's how I started. Right? It was like, oh, you're the sports person. Great, help me with the sports thing. But you start to realize that these founders, whether it's in sports or in something completely far afield of that, there are a lot of similarities between them. There's a certain risk profile, certain intelligence, certain skill sets they have as founders. So for me, just meeting founders of all different types, breeds, and colors and sizes and everything else, that's what rounds it out for me, because I get to see those sometimes gaps between founders, but also the similarities between founders. And so for me, I take meetings with founders all the time because I just want to hear more of their business plans. I want to hear more of their thoughts, more of their optimism, and how to think about this. And then also from my side, working with angel investment groups and working, knowing people in the VC industry and everything else, then tying those parts together and making those matches and saying, hey, there's a real idea here. How do we actually get this funded? Like, hey, we've got it funded. Let's go. Right. That's the exciting part for me. So, I've
Love
already
it.
shared this in the pod, but for me, it's always a chance to meet more founders and hear more about what they're working on and see how, if and how I can help or how the network can help.
Love it. That's fantastic, Scott. So cool. And then, yeah, for those that want to, connect with you, learn more about Scott, what do you suggest? Where can they connect with you?
Yeah, probably two spots. So the first one would be I have a website, it's a company called 77 Analytics, so 77analytics.com. And then on LinkedIn, I'm Scott M. Jablonski, my middle initial, Michael, Scott M. Jablonski. So you can find me on there, and I'll be posting and talking about things and meeting people all the time on there. So those are probably the two easiest ways to
Awesome.
find me.
I love it, and I'm loving your updates in the investor and startup and global stuff you're thinking about that you're sharing on LinkedIn. So keep it coming, and I encourage anyone in your world in innovation, tech, and startups to check it out. And been a pleasure, man. Love the chats as always.
Dude, thank you, Ty. It's great to reconnect.